The best way to get better at programming is to practice. And in this example, we're going to look at how we build labels and text fields and add them to our panel or frame. As always, these files are available for download using the link provided below in the description. We'll pause for a few seconds so you can download it and then follow along together. All right, so let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is just look at what we've already got created for us. We have example 5, and this is letting us set our title, our size, and we have set out a layout manager. In this case, we're looking at grid layout, and we're going to look at the layouts in more detail in a future video. But for now, we can just see what is set up here. We have 2 rows and 2 columns. We also have a static main down below. That's just going to simply create an instance of our example 5 and then display it for us. So this is what we have. Importing, we're importing swing java.awt. You might think, well, why are we importing AWT if we're using swing elements? Well, the grid layout is part of AWT. They didn't recreate that inside of swing. It's automatically part of AWT, so we need to import that. And we also are importing java.awt.event in case we need any event handling. All right, so what are we going to do first? Well, we're going to create some class level variables. I'm going to say private JLabel. JLabels are labels. They are generally text that's not going to change. They are descriptive in nature and they describe some sort of field that is next to us. So we're typically not going to be changing this. And I'm going to call this name label. We'll see why in a second. And private J. This is going to be a text field. There's also a text area, which is a multi-line display. There's a text pane, which can be used for doing some graphical representation. We're going to look at just the text field, which is a single line of plain text. And I'm going to call this name. So I have a label, which is named very similar to name. I always like to do that. That way I know what label goes with what other field I have, whether it's a text field, combo box, etc. Inside of my example 05 that I have listed here, inside my constructor for example 5, this is where I need to create my name labels and my name. So I'm going to say name label equals new JLabel. You can see it has a bunch of information here of my possible constructors, including things like just simply text. That's what I want because I'm just going to put in here name and a semicolon. There are different methods I can call for name label. So if I come up here and say name label dot, you can see some of these. Some of the most common ones you're going to do is if I need to change the text and say get the text or set the text, setting an icon if necessary. And I typically like to set my horizontal alignment. That way it's pushed to the right. Now, what alignment would it be? It puts it abort by default. I don't know why Visual Studio Code does that. So I'm going to say J label dot, and it should come up with some different values for me. If it doesn't, I know that right is an integer and set horizontal alignment is actually looking for an integer value. That makes it just a little bit faster. Right is a built-in default that we can access. So that makes it very easy for us to clean up and use. I'll then do name. It's going to equal new, and it's a J text field. I can have it with some default value. If I give it a string text, I can specify some other values, or I can have it be blank. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm then going to start to add my elements. So I'm going to say this.add. I'm going to add a component. The component is going to be name label, this.add name. Now I'm going to come down here and run this real quick. You can see it gives me name. It gives me a huge text box. Now, I might be asking, why does it give such a big space? Well, that's because grid layout said I have to use all of my space. I need to split it amongst all of my rows and columns. This is a great example of how I did that. I'm going to close this. What happens if I specify only one row? So how many rows and columns I define, as well as how big my panel is very important for this. Obviously, it looks kind of really silly with this. I would want to have a panel or frame that's appropriate size based upon how many rows and columns I would have. Now, one question is, how do I set the value of my text box, or how do I get the value of the text box? Well, we'll be looking at that in future examples, as well as other forms of data, such as list boxes, combo boxes, etc. So please give the video a like if it helped you, and consider subscribing so you can see more videos on how to get better at programming.